Hello and welcome from Digital Works Group. We're delighted that you're able to join us today for our webinar, Who Should Own Digital Change? My name's Sophie and I'll be helping to moderate the webinar along with my colleague Claire. So you'll see us manning the Q&A, the chat and the polls. This is the 6th digital education webinar this year, and our aim is to share practical and proven advice for businesses looking to make the most of the digital opportunities out there. All our webinars can be accessed on demand, and we'll be sharing the recording from today's session. In our previous webinars, some people have requested the slide deck, so just ping us a message in the chat box and we can make a note to send it over. Before I hand over to your host today, Andrew Salmon, I just wanted to point out a couple of final things. Firstly, we want to make sure it's an interactive session, so we'll be running a small series of polls just to find out a little bit more about your challenges and experiences. So please do get involved and vote. Also, please note if you are watching on demand, unfortunately, we won't be able to view the live polls. You'll also see in your Zoom control bar that there's a Q&A button, so please do post your questions as we go through the webinar and we'll do our best to answer as we progress. I'm sure Andrew will be able to cover most questions, but anything we can't answer live, we can get back in touch with you and follow up. You can also use the chat button to say hello and introduce yourselves. So that just leaves me to hand over to your host today, Andrew.
Thanks, Soph. Thank you very much for doing that. Hello, everybody. As Sophie says, we're going to be talking today about who should own digital change within an organisation. As you can probably tell, I am suffering a little bit with a cold today, so please forgive me if I start to cough and splutter a bit. I've got plenty of hot teas and other bits and pieces to try and get me through the session itself, so hopefully that's okay. I think I would want to say straight up, well, as Sophie highlighted, we do have a Q&A section at the end where people can ask their questions. Please do feel free to raise them as we're going along, okay? Quite like these sessions to be interactive as possible. As is our wont, we generally give fairly strong opinions on things through experience and through expertise that we've gained along the way. Especially on this one, this could be a session whereby those opinions, it's not a defined science, this one, but we are going to provide those opinions as we go through in this particular regard. But as I say, please do make it as interactive as possible as we go through. A little bit about me. I've been working in digital for far too long, probably about 25 years plus these days. Through a number of activities with companies in the past like AOL or FreeServe and things like that. And I've been an independent consultant for about 6 years, and then I've been part of Digital Works Group for the last 8 years or so. We've been very fortunate to work with some fantastic clients along the way, and we've learned a lot of things as part of that journey. Anyway, enough about me. So what we're going to talk about today, so the first part of the session we're going to start talking about is broadly to give some context really around what digital is today, because it's an important backgrounder to our opinions on who should own digital change, and also secondly, what companies can do to kind of help that. We are going to cover a couple of use cases towards the end of it. One where we saw a company doing it, in our opinion, very well. Another one who potentially had some more challenges from a structural perspective, and that might give some good insight for people. Final bit is any Q&A, but as I say, please do ask any questions that you want to do as we go through the session. I'm sure Sophie and Claire will stop me in mid-flow, and then we can kind of cover those. As you probably already know, I can talk for England, so as I say, please make it interactive. One of the core questions that we get asked all the time is, what is digital? Okay, and digital today is a pretty broad church term. Okay, it's a fairly all-encompassing thing, but we look at it as a way that you need to adapt, but also secondly can be used to solve business problems. And that could be in the areas of marketing, so the addition of digital marketing techniques into your go-to-market planning, the creation of assets like websites or or mobile applications or other platform related activities, how you can change your processes and digitize those for any efficiency gains, how you need to change your experience, okay? We as humans have changed quite dramatically in the way that we consume and buy things, and there needs to be a change to those experiences over that period of time. Clearly is related to technology and data, okay? That's really important in that particular regard. Some people say digital is it's the skinny front end part, and then IT is the other bit at the back end. I don't propose to that at all. Effectively, digital is the experience, and IT is the enablement of that experience increasingly. Final thing, obviously, it can be the employee value proposition or part of that. The tool services or the activities, the environment that people need to create in their businesses to attract millennials or whatever, or whoever those skills that they need to do. So digital is a change in behavior, but also secondly, a set of solutions to allow a company to adapt in that particular regard. What that really means is this kind of realization that, as I've just said, us as humans have changed quite dramatically in the way that we buy and interact, okay? Our behavior and our expectations have changed significantly over this period of time. We're more empowered, we're more knowledgeable, we can say good or bad things very quickly about organizations who don't fulfill our requirements. And our expectations really have grown significantly over that period of time, as some companies have embraced digital experiences as part of what they do, and that's provided good benchmarks for us as buyers. But it also relates to how we work with partner companies, increasingly through channels. Those behaviours, the adoption of digital and the expectations associated with that has grown, and also, as I just said previously, and the talent within our organisations. What that broadly means, if you look at it from that experience, that talent, that go-to-market, that technology, that operational process, that digital assets, businesses really need to adapt and change to these changes which are happening in the environment. And that is from a vision, a strategy plan, a capabilities, and their own environmental aspects, as I say, in terms of the way that their talent interacts. So for me, that's what digital and digital change is really about. It's a recognition that expectations out of the market or the way we do things have changed. And like any businesses from the last 5,000 years, the most successful ones are the ones that adapt to that new environment moving forward. And fundamentally, for us these days, and the challenge for CEOs and the others in the C-level team and whole organizations is ensuring that that is integrated in that change is integrated so it matches what the market and customers and partners and talent are requiring. So how important is doing this? Well, it's fairly self-explanatory. I would suggest that it's pretty important. It's very important. Digital isn't the only change agent that companies have to deal with. Economic conditions, regulatory environments, and everything else are real proponents to it. But I would argue very strongly that digital, because of the rate of adoption, because of everything else going on, is probably the most pervasive change agent that the changing markets and expectations at this particular point in time. So any companies ignoring it, personally, I think they do so at their peril. Because we can see that the most digitally adapt businesses, and there's a number of examples of this, but I've taken some like financial or insurance or Amazon, which is a default. They really are more profitable than other businesses, and they're also strategically more strong than other businesses out there. And we've got plenty of other examples of companies who haven't adapted in that particular regard, and maybe haven't injected the right degree of change and adaptation in their business, along with the digital theme as part of that. Thomas Cook, while it wasn't all about digital failure in that business, they didn't adapt to the market at that particular point. They didn't adapt to the new ways that people were buying things online. They had An old way of selling things through retail stores, which was a very costly way of doing so. And when you combine that with the fact that most of their footfall were going online, that was their particular recipe for success. But again, there's plenty of examples in that particular regard. One of my favorite quotes from a successful CEO, which is Dan Schulman, is what's on that slide, which is past success is the biggest impediment to future success. The reason why companies can get fairly compliant, and they also say, well, we've been successful, why should we change? The whole environment is changing, okay? What you've done before may not work in the future, so you do have to adapt in that particular regard. How challenging is it? That's another question that we get asked quite often. The answer to it is it's hard to do, okay? I have absolute sympathy for senior teams or whatever businesses who's trying to go through this change at this particular point in time, because it is really pervasive, okay? So we picked out just a few examples of that in terms of an environmental thing. So if you look at it from a customer and talent perspective, as I've said earlier, that has never been more complex or demanding or discerning and empowered. Good insight into that was from our friends at McKinsey, who did some insight into the degree of influence is that people now look for or insight before they make a buy decision. Now, in the past, that was about 5. So if you're a good marketeer, you'd work that out and you'd make that degree of influence at that particular point in time and channel people towards that buy decision. Today it's 20. There are far more sources of information. There are far more ways to interact. There's far more ways to look to see whether a company is a good bet to actually buy the equipment or whatever you're looking for from. Okay, it's just more complex. Another thing, as I said, we're a very impatient bunch these days. eMarketer did some good insight now, probably a couple of years ago actually, that shows the degree of impatience that people have. We're all time poor these days, and typically a lot of people, if they don't get a good experience or a good online experience within just a matter of seconds these days, then they'll go somewhere else. They can find competition very quickly, so that's pretty challenging. Okay, 20 years ago, companies didn't have to deal with this at all. There's been a whole raft of change in the way that they go about their digital marketing and their activities in that regard. Said before, technology and data is especially data for me actually, is a massively important thing. It's a fantastic empowerer of what you're doing. It moves organizations in their business model from an OPEX related activity into an increasingly CAPEX related activity. What does that bit of gobbledygook means? It means generally that they can do things more efficiently and therefore a lower cost base once they've made the technology investment. It's also an enormous enabler for the way that the customer experience needs to be. Data is the heart of that. If you can mine that correctly, you can deliver it in the right way, you can create increasingly relevant experiences, which then stops customers waiting 3 seconds and then wandering off at that particular point in time. But it's also super complex and confusing at times, okay? So a little bit of a graphic which showed there in one of my favorite areas or technical areas out there is in marketing technology, okay? Now, marketing technology obviously is vitally important for the way that a lot of companies go to market, whether that's B2C or B2B, okay? And in 2011, when it was fairly nascent as a topic really, there was about 150 providers out there providing this broad MarTech solutions, from how you can acquire customers better, how you can get your brand out, how you can convert better, etc., etc., etc. within it. Today, there's 7,000 plus organizations pitching their wares in this particular regard. So even if you have been around the block a while, like I've been, it's pretty confusing to understand how not only the universe of those companies, but also secondly, how they fit together. So again, I have super, you know, a very oh God, I can't find my words today. Apologies about this. I feel a lot for the IT directors and the CTOs and CIOs out there who need to put these things together. It's pretty hard stuff doing it. It's also hard for the marketeers who are increasingly being expected to become pseudo IT people in that particular regard. But working together, I think people can achieve it. Final thing is pace of change. Okay, I'm sure a number of people on the line have probably seen these things called internet minutes and stuff like that. What's been dramatic over the last few years has just been the general growth of people's online behaviours and activities. What I think is interesting from 2018 to 2019 is the shift of those activities. Okay, so there's much more activities related to video and other stuff like this, but that growth and that composition is changing quickly, and therefore the pace is really high in the way that the markets are changing, and therefore what you need to be able to do as a business to adapt. You need to be flexible and you need to be able to change fast. When you combine that kind of the demands of your customers and also your talent with your technology and data complexity and the speed of being able to move, that brings me back straight away to why I think I have a lot of sympathy for those people going through the change at this time, because the challenge of adaptation in that environment, especially as you're bigger, or if you're a very complex organization, you've got multi brands, multi locations, is very, very complex in that regard. Claire, I think we've got a sneaky poll on this actually, just to ask the attendees if that can run.
Sure, yeah, let's have a bit of fun and find out, according to Nielsen, how many digital devices does the average person in the UK have? Why don't you go ahead and vote? Thank you very much.
I think that's pretty good, actually. Yes is the answer. The answer is 4 to 5. So well done, everybody. Okay, in virtually getting that right. I think the key thing is it just reinforces the fact that we not only consume things in a multi-device way, but we do. That's much more complex in the way that you have to deliver things moving forward. So well done. Great, but nice to know we've got a knowledgeable set of people on the line today. Just bear with me. So if that's all happening at this particular point in time, what does that mean for most businesses? Well, most businesses now fall into 3 states as we see it. There's those who haven't seen the disruption happening, for whatever reason that may be, and they need to be turned around really rapidly. And it's an unfortunate statistic that actually there's more and more of those type of companies out there. There are a lot of people in what we call planned transformation. Okay, they see the changes happening and they need to go about it in a planned way, but they have time, more time than the rapid turnaround, whereby the fire is under their feet to go through that. And there are a lot of companies in that particular space through lots and lots of sectors. Some sectors are more advanced. Obviously, if they're a bit more close to the customer, they're probably more advanced in the way they need to do it. If they're a little bit further back in a B2B channel, then they probably have got a little bit more time on their hands. But either way, there's many companies in that planned transformational space. What is quite interesting is kind of what we would term an end state, really, or at least an advanced state, which is there's a lot of what we call disruptive innovators or disruptors, okay? And that's a number of companies who fit into that. Now, we've said there's few, and actually from a big corporate perspective, there is only few, but there's lots of entrepreneurs out there, and they would fit into this, okay? So there's a bunch of smaller businesses which are strong innovators. Their challenge, of course, is to mature and get out into the market in a particular regard, but there are only a few bigger organizations who I would say are disruptors and disruptive innovators in a game-changing way. Okay, and a few of those was what I indicated earlier. Companies like Ant Financial, keep an eye on those guys coming from China. They're a significantly adaptive business and a really strong innovator coming through. How companies are adapting today? Well, Some of them are tackling this in a fully integrated manner, trying to change their states. Others are being more ad hoc in the way that they're looking to adapt. Okay, maybe they're creating new digital products. Maybe they're looking at those different marketing approaches. Maybe they're a bit early stage, but they understand that it's important to create a compelling and motivating vision and strategy moving forward. And one thing I would say, okay, occasionally situation or appetite or just people don't have the resources to be able to do it may point to a less integrated way of undertaking this change, okay? But if you kind of understand the threats and opportunities moving through, especially on slide 6 and some of the conditions like pace on slide 7, from my perspective, the ideal approach is always a staggered yet fully integrated one. You go about your change in a planned way, but you deliver it so you start to get the best benefits faster. So you might do all of these activities which are on this, but you kind of put it together in the right way and you deliver it in the right change, because that's what your customers and your talent and your partners are demanding, okay? And the environment is kind of pushing people to do that quickly and start to develop adaptive organizational states. Here's an example of an integrated approach that we use at times just to help companies understand the approach that they could take, okay? So we call it the digital maturity curve or the digital evolution curve, if that's another way you want to look at it. Typically, we break it down into 3 stages, and I'm not going to go through this in too much depth, but pretty much stage 1 is about your marketing transformation, how you go about it. It's the typical one, led by a CMO maybe, whereby the company's looking to inject all of these new digital activities into their go-to-market approaches. And that could be using PPC, SEO, enhancing their web or mobile assets, and looking to put in place early and nascent kind of MarTech environments to be able to support those type of things. They typically, we recommend that because they will get reach and revenue benefits, and it's also achievable, okay? You're not actually trying to boil the ocean in one go. So you get a momentum within your business. This is the staggered approach I was talking about. This is a good way of doing transformation. Might not be the right way to do turnaround where the fire really is under your feet, but it is a way to do planned transformation. But you're trying to get that benefit, because we found along the way that actually when companies start to provide success and other activities such as that, and it's easier to bring others along with them, okay? It gets so, please forgive me any CFOs on the call today, the CFO turning around and going, this is just not working, okay? Digital does work, you just have to do it in the right way. Stage 2, you've got your kind of momentum from stage 1 and some of the foundation places here. This is the hard yards. This is the big transformational step. Typically, again, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but it's typically driven by the understanding that the end-to-end customer experience needs to change, okay? And for a lot of organizations, especially traditional ones, they've actually structured in a functional vertical way, okay? Customers don't think like that. They just want to buy something and have a good experience, and if things go wrong, be supported and be treated extraordinarily well, okay? The customer experience falls over in a vertical functional way at handover points, okay? And people don't understand. They do a really good job of their bit, but it might not be the right thing for that overall customer experience and that handover. So there's a realization that actually, if we start to do this, we get even better. So it's not just about acquisition, it's about usage, it's about support, it's about advocacy at that end of time. And we have to start thinking about that. But that's a fundamental shift for lots of businesses from an organizational IT platform perspective, organizational environment skills and everything like that. But it can be done because you're on that momentum shift already, which has gone through your marketing transformational stage. And if you do it well, not only do you continue to enhance your reach and revenue, but you're also probably going to be delivering it. Remember that CapEx thing I was talking about? You start to deliver it in a more efficient way of doing things. You might be digitizing better operational processes, and therefore your profitability begins to enhance. which is what Capgemini found, if you remember back on slide 6. The fundamental thing, I think, actually, from this stage, is you've done, as I say, you've done the hard yards. You've also more than likely got your data environment in place. And at that point, what it allows you to do, you've got an adaptive organization, you've probably got your data, you've got everything else you need to be in place. You can then start to move into what we call game-changing innovation state. And that's industry-changing innovation. I'm not talking about just some small process change. I'm talking about a fundamental way to shift things within the industry. And at that particular point, you've got real competitive advantage, not only because you can create stuff which delights customers, okay, but also secondly, you can do it far faster, more quickly, in a much more relevant way. So you'll be pleased to know that actually that is the context of what we're going to be talking about, okay? But it really does provide, I think, the environment to support some of the opinions that we've got and which we will now go through in this particular regard, okay? But before I do this, we took some research from MIT Sloan, who are actually really advanced in their thinking around business adaptation and innovation, especially around digital, okay? And they came out with this really strong statement, and this was about 2 or 3 years ago now, okay? And the critical factor here, all right, in terms of who should own digital change, and the very strong clue here is the word leader, okay, and what they did. So companies that succeed have leaders who share their vision and define a planned approach, an integrated approach. They create capabilities across the organization with authority, which is really important, to ensure that the organization moves forward in the right way, okay? And they reward and corral everybody within the business to work towards it. And that's how you get a rapidly adaptive organization in that particular regard. Now, Claire, I think we've got another poll here. We're just going to ask the audience just another quick question before we move on.
Sure, thank you. Yep, it's for any company-wide digital transformation program, which C-level team member is the most important to its success? We'd love it if you could go ahead and vote. Thank you.
Oh, that's great, guys. Okay. Now, this is a bit of a trick question, I'm afraid. I've been a bit nasty here because the answer is all of them. Okay. But if I was forced to give you an answer, okay, on which one, I would agree with the 67% of people who have voted that it's the Chief Executive Officer. So thank you very much again, guys, for voting on that. Again, it's lovely to see that we've got a really educated audience today. So you put all that together, in my mind at least, and I think everybody within Digital Works, that we've got an inescapable truth to start to develop in what we're doing. Okay, so started off by demonstrating that changes or digital and the change to adapt to that is pretty important. We also established that it's pretty difficult. Okay, but when you combine the fact that it's with that multifunctional picture, e.g. all of these things need to adapt over a period of time, and that MIT piece of research that we shared with everybody, it kind of starts pointing to this in terms of who should own digital change. Okay, ultimately it sits with the board, okay, or the senior management team, okay, led by the CEO and his C-level team. This is absolutely pivotal, okay? We came across lots of it was very interesting. I was chatting with one of our partners in the strategy and leadership team yesterday, and he shared some really interesting anecdotal evidence here. He's been talking to a lot of CEOs in businesses, and he often asks this question. He says, so who owns your digital change in your organization? And he actually said there are very few. He said, oh, it's me. Normally it's Bob, who's in our digital marketing team, or whatever it is. people can't think like this any longer, okay? The change of the organization sits squarely with the C-level team and ultimately, and digital is pervasive across all of those functions. So it's not one person, okay? It's effectively a skill set and an experience set which needs to be owned by all of the board to provide the appropriate leadership in that particular regard. And that is really important, okay? Now, each transformational stage can be owned by an appropriate C-level person. That's fine, okay? But ultimately, if you buy into that integrated approach and a journey for the organization over a period of time, ultimately, and I agree with, as I said before, that previous slide, or that previous poll, sorry, that CEO is absolutely pivotal to it in that particular regard, okay? It's an uncomfortable truth for many. Many CEOs are uncomfortable with digital because they're a bit older like me, and they remember actually that they've been successful in the way they do things. But the market and the environment has changed around them, and they need to be successful in the way they go about understanding digital and actually progressing in that particular regard. And they clearly, all the way through, this needs to be permeated through the organization. So your executional teams, if you want to call them that, are kind of skilled, empowered, they operate in a cross-functional manner and are suitably rewarded. Organizations need to act like tribes, okay, not functional silos. That won't cut the mustard. Otherwise, that will break your customer experience. They got to operate in a cross-functional way to good creation processes in an agile type of way, which is orientated to the customer and the business model. And they have to be supported by a clear vision and a clear mandate to change the business, which is being led and empowered through the board and ultimately by the CEO. So if you're going to buy into that, and I'm a very strong opinion of that, and I won't apologise for that at all. Actually, this is who we believe shouldn't be own digital change. Okay. Now, over the past few years, there's been the rise of what we would call the chief digital officer, and believe me, I've been a chief digital officer along the way. Okay, but I don't believe chief digital officers should be owning the change unless they've got a specific job. Okay, which is to educate the rest of the C-level team in the short term to go up that learning curve quickly. If that's the case, I buy into that's an absolutely necessary thing. But if they are expected to change the whole organization across everything in that particular regard, where they're actually having to try and work with functional leaders to be able to do that, but it's their drive, I personally think the CEO is abdicating their responsibility at that particular point in time. And it often just causes organizational confusion. It's another C-level role, which is sometimes awkward, especially for companies who are more mature in the way they're doing things and whatever. I don't think that role is particularly useful at that particular point. So I don't buy into that, I'm afraid, okay, unless it's a specific educational task and educating the business and how they move through, but ultimately handing over that knowledge and that empowerment to them over that period of time. That I do buy into. It's clearly not some disimpaired poor middle manager, okay? We've seen that with a number of clients along the way. That ain't gonna work, okay? They don't have the authority to make wide-scale change at the right degree of pace. That doesn't work, okay? And equally, it's not some poor young person who frankly probably knows digital better than I do these days, but they don't know how to utilize it to create a significant change. Change is the hard bit, okay? Understanding digital, yeah, it is hard because there's multiple disciplines of it these days, but you can get your head around that. But how you apply it and you change an organization, that's often beyond the realms of somebody who just knows digital, and especially if they're early stage in their career. And we've seen organizations who have tried to do that, and successful ones, but not successful in their change. So if you kind of translate it, excuse me, on that transformational journey, using our stages, utilizing pretty much the leadership streams and everything like that, picture kind of emerges and what needs to be done. So if I was leading marketing transformation, the ultimate owner, as I say on the right hand side, is your CEO. The CMO is going to do it from an experienced digital marketing perspective, and it's going to be clearly supported quite strongly by the CTO, CIO, who are there to provide the environment or the technical environment to make that change. They will also need support from the CFO and the HRD. That's pretty important along the way. The Human Resources Director in that particular regard. As you move into stage 2, where it's much more wider change, you've got multiple owners and multiple streams. It probably needs to be brought together by an implementation director at that stage, but again, ultimate owner is going to be the CEO. Still needs very strong support, not only in their own respective streams, but also secondly, across all those streams from the financial officer, so they get the right level of investment, and of course, the human side of things from the head of talent. Final one is game-changing innovation. You may have a chief innovation officer if that kind of works for you at that particular point in time. They will be working, there will be absolutely adaptation, but only adaptation at that point in terms of the way the environment works to actually stimulate new innovations from the CTO and CIO. It's the same support group, it's the same ultimate owner along the way. The consistency is the ultimate owner, who's the CEO. So kind of say that's who should own digital change at that particular point. And as I say, fairly strong opinions on that, and I don't apologise for that. But how do you make it easier? How do organisations, how do the board, how do the senior team, how do everybody kind of create the environment within the business to make any change less risky, smoother and faster and more likely to be successful? Now, as a business, we have what we would call the 9 factors of change that we use to advise businesses on, and they are staggered in that particular regard. And we have what we would call 4 strategic change factors and 5 executional change factors, which actually, although we haven't got the slide here today, relates to quite strongly to a piece of insight that Gartner did about 2 years ago. So the fundamental one, if you're going to try and create this environment, the capabilities, the approaches within the business, which helps all of the executional people who are tasked with it and the C-level team who are responsible for managing and leading that change. At the top of the pile is you've got to have a clear vision, strategy and objectives and targets. This is your staggered integrated approach. You've got to know where you want to end up. You might adapt it as you're going through in the mix, but you've got to kind of know where you want to end up. Otherwise, you're making it up as you go along. And if I'm blunt about it, that really, really works. So that's really important. So it doesn't have to be a war and peace. It can be just, this is what we need to do. This is how we're going to kind of achieve it. Here's a roadmap. We've already talked about this bit, and this is what all been about today, is the ownership of digital by all the executive team, okay? And hopefully, okay, some of our logic and some of our arguments make sense along that particular regard. So I won't go into that one anymore. Other bit is, as a cultural thing, you need to be customer experience led through your business. Yes, you need to tie that to your business model. So you do the right things for your customers and your business. But fundamentally, that needs to be pervasive within the business itself. It's a cultural strategic factor. Other bit, you need the right organizational environment and empowerment, and probably shape skills and everything else, okay? Processes you can work out. They do what you tell them to do. Technology, broadly, does what you tell it to do. Humans are really complex beasts, okay? So you've got to ensure that it's the human element, which is the most complex element, is in the right shape. And that's another really strong strategic factor. The rest of what we call executional change factors. So it's very useful because technology these days for digital change is so important. That as part of your strategy, objectives and targets, that a theme of that is you have a long-term architectural plan and a data architectural plan within that. So you better get that in place. You do need to make the right levels of investment, okay? I think we've had a webinar and a blog and a podcast about this before. Change is hard. That's why the CEO and the CFO have got to get behind this and make that work. So you've got to have the right levels of investment. If you do that, you will get the payment back, okay? It can be tough because the investment can be quite large, especially at stage 2. but with a bit of faith and doing it in the right way, and with the right investment, you will make that change. And the investment is in technology, it is in process creation, it is in changing your customer experience, it is in skills and resources. A way to support the right organisation environment is you need a communication plan which brings all this to life. There's no point being in a blackened room, 7 C-level people come out and go, da-da, that's the plan, and nobody else in the business knows about it. That doesn't work at all. You probably need to, maybe not at stage 1 in your marketing transformation, but definitely in your stage 2, your company-wide transformation, need to manage and plan your change centrally. I'm a big proponent of an implementation director who helps the execution elements and bring them all together in that integrated way. And the final thing, which is you need the right cross-functional working processes and also the right creation practices. Arguably today, you need a hybrid approach to that. So it's planned agility in the way that you deliver stuff. If you're a software development company, then be as agile as you want and be pure agile. For the rest of the universe, probably you need to do this integrated change approach, but with agile working practices amongst those streams to start delivering it. That's just an opinion at that point in time. So, I'd be pleased to know we're not too far away from the end of the webinar at this point before we can get into some Q&A stuff. So here's an example of a success, an organisation that we helped around about 2015, actually until about 2018, which is Travelodge marketing transformation stage. And what did they do well? Well, let's have a look at their outcome first, and then we'll work backwards from that. They had many critical components, which was aligned to the transformation success. Yes, some of it could be slightly better along the way, but you can't really argue with their performance. In 2012, they're in pretty much a turnaround situation. They had 500 hotels turning over about 100 million quid, which is terrible, actually. By 2016, that turnover had gone up 8-fold. They had significant profitability, and the digital function was very important and actually had transformed significantly, and it then represented about 80% of that turnover. So what did they do well? Well, the first thing was they had a CMO and a lady called Karen, who was excellent. She really believed it. She was responsible for that marketing transformation. She was knowledgeable about digital. She was open. She quickly learned about stuff to do with transformation. They had a clear vision of what an end state would look like, partly led by some of their competitors like Premier Inn, and very collaborative, supportive, and empowering, generally within that environment and that team. She was well supported by a CTO who had brilliant digital experience and was a massive proponent to move from a very waterfall-driven approach to a more agile way of doing things. It wasn't pure agile, it was a more agile way of doing things. They had extraordinarily good working practices, not when we first started with them, between what they would call the commercial digital team, marketeers, and also their technologists, but that through significant work and activity created really strong working practices. And they had a good, clear understanding of what their endpoint architectural environment was. They had a very strong, and I won't embarrass him by saying his name, but one of the most talented enterprise architects that I've actually come across in this particular regard. So they were well skilled as well in that particular regard. They had a challenging CFO who was a little old school around financial controls and stuff like that. I thought that slowed progress a little bit, but was absolutely willing to invest in the investment of the new digital environment. Once you convinced her, it was all get on with it, guys, at pace. Similar thing from the HRD, the Human Resources Director. They had a little bit of a lack of investment in that central team, which slowed things up in terms of the hiring processes that they went through. But again, it was there was no question mark what that digital or the injection of digital skills and the way they were doing things was strategically important. Peter, who's the CEO, absolutely scary individual, but absolutely brilliant. One of the brightest people that I've come across. He was a massive advocate of what needed to be done with digital. He was, as I called it, all in. We have to do this, guys. And he was absolutely a strong involvement through the process. And he kept, this is where the scary bit came in slightly, he kept real pressure on the pace. Come on, guys. Fully understood that the environment was changing and he had to keep the rate of transformation controlled but high. And that's what he did. And team empowerment generally was pretty good in that regard. So in a relatively short period of time, Travelodge were turning their business around. Digital became more important through that process, okay? And as I said, ultimately, and probably even more today, is the main ways that they enable bookings and therefore create revenue and reach out into their growing asset base of their hotels. It is a success story in what they did. Let's go on to a challenging one that we experienced this year, actually. Again, company who was private equity owned, was brilliant business, a brilliant traditional business in that regard. So let me walk through this, all right, and then I'll come to the outcome. So new hire, Chief Product Officer, CMO, who had all the skills, appointed by the private equity company to come in and drive the transformation of the business, try and transform this business. We need to make more money. We need to increase our multiple. We need to be strategically flexible. We need to become CapEx rather than OpEx based, etc., etc. And he knew it, okay? He knew what he needed to do. He was very knowledgeable about digital and transformation, somebody I've known for about 15 to 20 years. Had clear vision end state, and worked extraordinarily hard in terms of being collaborative, supportive, and empowering, not only to us who were working with him, but also secondly, with everybody else within his team. He fundamentally knew that this was a new pivotal environment, pivotal function for the business, and went about going about ensuring that others within the organization could work with him. But it didn't really work out quite so well, okay? When we moved from the planning stage, so the clear strategic vision, the detail associated with that, into the executional stage, and I'll come on to that in a moment, okay? So what, in our opinion, didn't they have quite right? So the first thing was, did they have a knowledgeable CTO, CIO? The answer was no, not really. They had what I would call an old school IT director who didn't understand what the end game was and actually didn't really have much ambition to be part of that journey. His job, and continue to see that as just keeping the current operation running, keeping the lights on. So that was a bit of a problem. There was a CFO who was brought into the end state, but actually hadn't, ironically himself, didn't have any authority to invest. And that clearly, obviously, significantly slows progress when you have to try to invest in this particular regard. They had appointed a C-level digital chief digital officer, okay, who was brought in to own digital, okay, and that was a real conflict between the chief product officer and that individual, actually, because the chief product officer was brought in to lead the change, of which digital was an element of it, and actually that created some very, very interesting dynamics between all three, including the IT director, on ownership and role. Absolutely, in this case, it just didn't work, okay. The human resource director was similar to the CFO. Both of those, and the chief product officer was brought in by the private equity company to try and help with the process. But again, they were brought in to help. He was brought into the end state, but again, he didn't have any real authority within the business to change the structure and the culture. So you've got two of those really strong things, you know, change your IT environment, change your humans, okay? They didn't have authority to do that. That's quite a problem. There's no COO, so that was not even on the table about how they could digitize their processes and enhance their operational processes. Can't go into divulge too much because we continue to be under NDA on that, but there was a significantly missed opportunity to do that from a cost reclaim perspective. There was no implementation transformational director. To quote, we just don't do it that way, okay? And therefore, it was very difficult to plan and integrate that change along the way, okay? But the CEO was brilliant, okay? One of the most gifted individuals that, again, that I've come across along the way. And he was a firm advocate for this, and he had exceptional vision for where the business needed to do. But his particular problem is he'd never transformed a business. He was a real entrepreneur. He'd grown a business. He'd grown a really successful business, which was then needing to be changed because their environment had shifted. But also, secondly, the shareholders wanted it changed, okay? And he didn't want to let go of some of that control. And therefore, that stopped the empowerment of some of the other people that he should have been relying on to get that element sorted out. And generally within the business, because of that central control, okay, it was very limited in terms of other people being able to make the right level of decisions to increase the pace and stuff like that. So the outcome was this, okay, very clear vision, very clear plan, very clear ambition to what needed to be done. What we would call in our business a very good planning stage or think stage, highly detailed, everything else like that. But actually, we secretly think that this has been a bit of a failure because it's difficult to make this change for the organisation, okay? It's been ultra slow. It's frustrating for many people within the business, and there has been some unnecessary politics in that particular regard. But what we've recognised through experience of working with others and other businesses is where those problems are, okay? And we are continuing to help our sponsor, which is the Chief Product Officer, okay, to try and address these problems within the business. And we hope once the CEO is slightly less distracted by other stuff going in the business, that we can start helping him understand those changes which needs to happen through his organisation. But at this point in time, this is a good example of a very, very successful business. Do you remember that quote from the PayPal CEO? And there you are, okay? They do need to adapt the capabilities within their organizations to make that change smoother and faster and less risky. And with 10 minutes to go, you'll be really pleased to know that's the end of me talking away, and I'll be very happy at this stage to take any questions that people have.
Andrew, we've got one question that came in. It was actually relating back to the poll in terms of who owns digital, and we were missing the the COO, and just the point that this person has made is that nothing will change unless the COO, the person who's actually delivering the revenue, is on board. So yeah, good point.
I can only agree. That's a very, very quick answer. That's an omission on my poll, okay? So whoever picked that up, that's an extraordinarily strong point to make. COO has got a really pivotal role in this. I mean, the CEO ultimately drives the direction of movement, but the day-to-day organisation and shift and everything else, T+1 as we call it, has to be driven by the COO if that's their role. Sometimes it's not their role, but it has to be done, especially in that stage 2, in that company-wide transformation. So very well done for highlighting that, and my apologies that we missed that. I hope it's been useful for everybody in the session today. As I say, please feel free to pick up brains in the future or anything like that. If you are going through your own transformation activities and everything else, very happy to have a conversation with anybody, provide some advice, give some insight, because this is a difficult thing to be able to do. But I hope the session today has been useful. It's been informative, sharing our experience and a little bit of expertise along the way. And my gravelly voice hasn't been too distracting for people when I've been delivering it. And if there's no other questions, just leaves me to say thank you very much, guys, for listening, and have a really good rest of your day.